Good morning. In this series of dialogues with the legends of microfinance, today we are glad to have a discussion with Mr. Harvinder Pal Singh, Chairman and Managing Director of Satin Credit Care Network Limited, one of the biggest microfinance institutions in India, spread out over all parts of the country and been growing and expanding its outreach to the poor and the downtrodden people of this country. And we are glad to have Mr. Singh with us today. Good morning, Mr. Singh. I am glad that you have consented to have this freewheeling discussion with us. And this naturally will be a record for the posterity and for the youngsters in the sector. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Satish. Thank you so much.
Mr. Singh, basically, you are a chartered accountant and a finance professional. But how and when and what motivated you to come to the microfinance sector?
So, Satish, it's been a very long journey. It's been a journey which has spanned over 31 years now. So when we first incorporated this company in 1990, I had finished my chartered accountancy about 6 years back. So I'm a qualified chartered accountant from 1984. And when this company was made, it was not termed as Satin Credit Care Network. It was actually known as Satin Leasing and Finance Limited. And leasing was, we used to do hire purchase of generator sets. And what we actually started doing was that we used to actually finance the genset at that point of time. This I'm talking of 1990, to small shopkeepers in Delhi. Now, when we actually started financing these gensets, the methodology which we adopted in terms of how we used to take our collection used to be on the daily installment basis. So what you actually hear of in now microfinance is you do the weekly, you do the fortnightly, and then you do the monthly. But what we came out with the concept at that point of time was that we used to collect daily installments from the shopkeepers for every genset which we used to finance. Now that used to be very easy actually for the shopkeeper to take out from his cash box and give that 50 rupees or 60 rupees and have a genset of his own. Now that actually became one of the key reasons where the shopkeepers actually said that, fine, now we've got a genset, please give us, maybe a working capital finance. Then we gave a working capital finance, then they said, give us a two-wheeler. The idea, because it became so used to be by the shopkeepers, that they could pay on a daily basis about 50, 60 rupees, and which was very easy for them to repay. So that's how we came into being. Now, being a chartered accountant, I think, every, for a chartered accountant, numbers are like something which they are very, very clear about, and, they like to, I won't say that play with the numbers, but they would like to be there with the numbers, So for us, that growth which we did, and to be very honest, this was microfinance, but we never knew that we were doing microfinance, So for us, we got born as a microfinance institution without even realizing that we were actually doing microfinance, So working capital finance of 10,000, 20,000 rupees. But the modus operandi was not JLG, it was all individual lending, for these small shopkeepers. So that's how, we came into being, and that's how, Satin, leasing and finance was incorporated and transformed into Satin Credit Care Network Limited at a later point of time.
It's quite an interesting story. It shows how the need creates an institution for itself, if I may say so.
Right.
But then, where exactly was the transformation into the JLG model of financing and MFI model, and how it happened? Did you find any inspiration in the existing Grameen models around that time?
So I think, what happened was that, the growth which was there from 1990 to about 2004, 2005 is when we actually would say that, we got baptized into microfinance, and the baptism happened through SIDBI. So we officially were never recognized as a microfinance player because we approached everybody. Everybody used to talk about JLG, and I think JLG and microfinance was prevalent more in South. For a North-based company to actually talk about microfinance was like kind of unheard of. So I think it became very difficult for us to even talk about it. So when we actually went to SIDBI in 2004, 2005. We actually made a presentation to them, and SIDBI recognized us as the first one from North, technically, who was doing microfinance, But the model used to be individual lending, again, the daily collection mechanism. But we got our first loan from an organized financial institution, which was SIDBI. And we got it, we got about 1 crore at that point of time. And for us, that was like a huge amount because our book when we actually went to SIDBI was about 9-10 crores, So that happened. That was our first foray, of baptism into microfinance, From there on till about 2008, we continued with the same model of doing individual lending to our individual shopkeepers, across over there. The only thing was that we did expand from Delhi to Ludhiana, Jaipur, and a couple of other places, In 2008, when we actually had our first investor, which was Low Capital, is that time when we really looked at the negatives of the individual lending model at that point of time, and then found that the JLG model technically has a lot of advantages as compared to the individual lending model. Now, those disadvantages which we thought was that one, growth was limited to the fact that you actually reach out to a customer and then you give out a loan to him, Now that the acquisition time was probably far more higher as compared to a JLG model, where you actually have a central leader and the leader forms a group, and then ultimately about 20-25 women will actually form a group. So at one go, you're actually lending to 25 people as compared to one by one piece across over there. So that was one of the negatives which we felt that the JLG model will take it away. The second was where we felt that the JLG model will definitely give us the collection optimism, or maybe the optimum quality in terms of how we are able to collect. Because over here, when we used to do daily collection, individual lending, we used to go shop by shop, and used to collect our installments. Over here, one center meeting, and you have 20 women paying you, simultaneously those installments. So the difference between one installment of collection and a bulk of 20 installments coming in one go was also probably one of the advantages with the JLG model has. And the third, which was there, was again that JLG model had a collateral guarantee with everybody standing as a guarantor to each other, rather than an individual borrower where you just get one guarantee maybe of a relative shopkeeper from where. So these advantages actually pulled us to the JLG model. And when we started our JLG model in 2008, we actually wanted to do UP, and we wanted to pick up the worst possible place in UP, so that, if we are able to be successful over there, then for us, it was that, we could probably be successful everywhere else. So we picked up Bulandshahr in UP and said, if we can do it well, and Bulandshahr was very notorious, and I think, and I don't want to mention this thing, but a lot of people, MFIs had come to UP and then burned their hands and had gone away, So for us, it was again a challenge which we wanted to take. And thankfully and God willingly, I think, we were pretty successful over there. And that's how, the JLG model came into being for us from 2008 onwards.
I think quite an interesting story. Singh Saab, now you have been in the sector for nearly 3 decades, and pure microfinance as such, we can say roughly over 2 decades from the time when basics came into existence. And you have seen the journey, and now Satin is one of the biggest institutions in the country. So how exactly you describe the growth of this sector in the last, let us say, 2.5 decades?
I think, Satish, this sector has probably seen a transformation at every possible stage, where it has faced challenges. I think, earlier, I think, where it all started from, it was probably, more of a NGO based kind of a model, which came into being, because that is from where the roots actually started, when the NGOs transformed into commercial ventures like NBFCs and the other stuff. And then you can see all across, Bandhan and everybody were probably, the first ones to actually transform from there. We were probably the only ones which had technically a commercial structure from start on. And for us, that transformation was not there. Our only transformation was from the individual lending model to the JLG model. That was the only transformation we had. But what I saw to have been, and I won't be very, and I think clear my views over here, that I think, the earliest stages when we transformed from an NGO model to a commercial model, I think, the tag of the NGO entity is still stuck onto the commercial thing which came in, I think that was probably the first mistake which happened for the sector, that, when you are actually entering into a commercial side of a business model, I think you don't have to probably, do away with the tag of being a social impact, this thing, it should be there, but it should not take the front place as such. It is a byproduct, yes, definitely, but then commercial things have to take place. So that was probably, I think, one of the mistakes, which happened, and which actually probably led to, I sense, overall the environment led to the debacle of what the Andhra Pradesh crisis and the Krishna Godavari crisis, which happened earlier on. And I won't probably go into specifics, but I think, from there on, the way it has grown, probably I think it was, have always been that there has always been somebody or the other actually pulling it away, and I think, that is probably one of the biggest problems which we have faced across the sector there. Be it the AP crisis, be it the demonetization, be it the way now the PCA frameworks and the NPA things which are coming up and which is probably going to be there, the Assam crisis, you talk of crisis, there's been crisis and crisis and crisis, so when people now talk about microfinance, and I think, they just talk about crisis, people tend to forget the kind of advantages, the kind of benefits, the kind of way we have actually helped to transform an unorganized market from the clutches of the money lenders, as well as the unorganized financial services market as such, to a very well organized market as such. We are probably one of the lowest in our operating cost of delivery to our borrowers across the world. But that is a fact which probably doesn't see the light of the day. And that is where my whole dissatisfaction emanates from, from all of us, technically. And I'm also a part of it. I don't want to say I want to be standing aside and then saying this, but I think, we've never been able to really look at microfinance the way it probably should have been looked at. We do wonderful business. We do actually really help the unorganized market come up to the space where we really want to see it, and probably any government, any country would like to see that, but somehow I think with the growth, the challenges faced, the way it has been handled, the way probably, I think things have really turned out to be, I think we've not been able to really tell the saga of what we've really been able to achieve, rather than the misfortunes and the things which have happened negatively for us takes a precedence over, over what we actually, are really doing wonderfully on the ground. So I think, that's probably the story, how it has evolved across for microfinance. And I hope maybe at some point of time it does change,
Yeah, I also do agree, but unfortunately, such a scenario painting is not confined only to India. Probably you must have seen this is a similar thing, whether you go to Latin America and have a look at the institutions there, or whether you go to Africa and have a look at the institutions there. So everywhere there is a realization, yes, that microfinance sector has really contributed bringing people into the formal financial sector and saved them from really usurious rates of interest. But everyone again asks, there is a big but, which the commentators and media and academics say about the microfinance sector. I think that is some constant endeavor all of us have to do. Probably somewhere we have all not been very successful in doing that, I think. And taking off from what you have mentioned, basically when you're talking in terms of a financial services institution, the base of that is it has to be financially viable, self-sustaining. But do you feel that financially viable institutions like microfinance institutions, especially NBFC, MFIs, can also carry along with them some sort of a social responsibility and social focus? You yourself have mentioned that probably the earlier focus on NGO type of attitude sometimes bogs down the sector. But despite that, what we can say that an MFI is not a pure finance company. It is supposed to have some sort of a developmental focus also. So can we marry both of these and still be a sustainable financial institution?
Absolutely. I think, Satiji, what you are saying is somewhat of what we as a characteristic NBFC MFI is an animal all about, basically. If you really look at this, for us, now with the advent of a lot of ESG coming up, I think people are looking towards that in a much more holistic way, which we always used to do. So what is ESG all about? It is environmental, social, and governance. Basically, you just added on maybe a governance factor to it. And I still remember when we got our first funding from an institution from outside. For them, it was all about that you take care of the environment, you take about the social impact goals and everything across the way. But that is embedded into us. Whatever we do in terms of our commercial enterprise as such, but the social goal will never go away, because the community which we serve, the bottom of the pyramid which we serve, both has the agenda of one, women empowerment, which is also one of the key factors and a key takeaway for microfinance. Tell me one of the asset class in any of NBFCs which has women specifically as a gender from whom you lend to. But the point is, where this is there, it also makes commercial sense for us. It goes without saying. My only disconnect over here always remains is that, yes, we do tell the world about women empowerment as such, and we have proved it and we are doing it. We are making commercial sense out of the social impact which we bring across on the ground also. And both of them have married each other. And it will always be there, as an MFI, as a microfinance institution, we will always remain embedded into both the spaces as such. Socially, yes, we are very relevant. Financial inclusion, yes, is our main agenda for us to go, because that's what our whole business model is all about. And that is from where we actually sustain ourselves. That is from where we grow ourselves. And that has to be the part and parcel of our lives, whatever times it comes. Even if we graduate from here and move maybe, one step up, it is the same microfinance borrowers which has taken again a leap of faith forward and moved on from a smaller ticket size loan to a higher ticket size, which again qualifies under the MSME lending. So for us, this is probably the best model which actually delivers both the commercial sense as well as the social sense together for any other asset class which is there in the financial services world in India or in the world. If you really look at it, this is where it is. Women, gender specific, rural households to a majority extent. All of us practically have about 60, 70, 80% of our portfolio which is rural. Which NBFC class talks about rural the way which we talk about? Look at the social impact of being there in the rural space as such. So that is where the difference lies. And we are commercial, yes, we have to sustain ourselves, we have to move forward. If we do not do so, technically it doesn't make sense even for our borrowers or the borrowers which we want to really bring in our fold. If it has to be sustainable, it has to be profitable. But the main thrust is, yes, we do not let go of our social goals.
I think things are very well put it. I think it's the message is quite clear from your side. Moving slightly to a different area. Now we have seen after Bandhan becoming a bank and 8 major MFIs becoming SFBs, the percentage share of in the microfinance space, the banks and other pure NBFCs, their percentage has increased. Whereas as per our data and RBI data also, only 1/3 is with the NBFC MFIs. So in this scenario, do you think that the banks are slowly coming in and eating away the space, and would there still be space for pure play MFIs, both NBFC MFIs and non-NBFC MFIs in this whole microfinance space?
See, again, Satiji, my viewpoint is that, see, all our peers, who have become SFBs as well as Bandhan, which is now a universal bank, basically for us, I think, this is a logical conclusion which had to come, and probably I think, it bodes actually very well for the MFI industry, because the moment you have a large universal bank whose baseline was microfinance and is still microfinance, it actually augurs very well for the microfinance industry. I think, for us, if we take a very short view or a myopic view of it, that, okay, the banks will take away, what we have probably done across this thing. But these were the same guys who were doing it with us. The only thing is that they have transformed their structure in a much more structured way of getting liability franchise as one of the key advantages which they have. But in other ways, I still consider them to be our peers, who were there with us, and they follow the same thing which we follow. No? So for us, it's maybe a graduation and maybe a change in the structure which has happened. But I think, for all of us, I think if we are able to demonstrate as NBFC MFIs in terms of, our I think, our corporate governance, in terms of the way we actually look at our borrowers, the rapport which we do, the doorstep delivery which we do, the way we are able to really handle crisis and everything across over there. Nobody can take it away from the NBFC MFIs. I don't think so. We still have sufficient space for all of us. We have sufficient ground to cover, for all of us. There is absolutely no dearth. I know the rejection rates, once all these crises hit, they do keep on rising, But that's the way how you filter a good and a bad customer. But believe me, if all of us, even we still exist as NBFC MFI, nobody can take that away. And my sense is that even if we still continue to be NBFC MFI for the next 10 years, we will all still keep on growing. We will still all have whatever we have in terms of delivery, in terms of our social impact, as well as our commercial impact, whichever is there. I don't think there is sufficient, sufficient ground for all of us to cover, and we can do that.
Yeah, and taking off from here, now I too agree that a logical progression from an NBFC MFI is to a bank or a small finance bank. But when my interaction with seniors in the sector at various stages, there was also at some point of time a question mark whether we should really look at becoming banks, looking at the burden of compliance and the burden of more stricter and more wider regulatory framework. But now with RBI coming with the scale-based regulation for MFIs and more stricter provisioning norms in tune with the banking sector, or sometimes more stricter than the banking sector and the PCA framework and all. Do you feel that that has really obliterated the what we can say, the regulatory line between the banks and non-banks? So it created a more incentive for the non-banks to transform into banks. Do you feel that we have entered such a situation today, and we should look at more number from our sector transforming into SFBs and universal banks?
I think two things over here which stand out, Satishji, is one, I think, the thing which is missing between the NBFC MFIs and the banks which are doing microfinances, the level playing field not being the same. I think, with the harmonization code, which we've been talking about for some time, which RBI still hasn't been able to give it to us. I think, that was probably one of the steps which could have brought both the structured entities into the same level playing field as such, because I still feel that once that comes in, I think, it will probably take away the difference which we feel right now between the banks as well as the NBFC MFIs is probably the main cause where we feel that difference to probably be, once the harmonization code sets in and we all remain on the same platform as banks as well as NBFC MFIs, I think, then probably the answer would probably be lessened, and the way we think right now would probably be will be the way we really do not want to think that way. That's one. The second, I think, and that's where my thought process is there is, yes, I think there should be measures which strengthen the NBFC MFI space also, not exactly to the tune the way banks are, because we don't have the advantages which they have in terms of the liability side and the other side, which probably gives it. And we have that disadvantage. My sense is if you're bringing in regulations the way you want to tighten the norms through PCA, through NPA classifications and scale-based things which have to probably bring in, give us the advantages which the banks also have. So if you're probably trying to bring in the kind of regulations on the asset side to a large extent, and make it as comparable to the banks, then give us the advantages which even the banks have. Why take that away from us? That is a thought, which the regulator has to really think about. And I think, that probably should be there. They have that advantage we do not have today. If you really look at whenever a crisis happens, what you have to do, you have to run to each and every bank, each and every financial institution, give me money. Everybody's clamoring for that. Why should that be? Why should that be? It doesn't happen to banks, even if they have bad NPAs or whatever it is, they still get their money. Why do we have to run and chase around? Basically, are we second grade? Somewhere that distinction probably has to go away. So if you're bringing in tighter based regulations on the asset side or on the sides on the NPA classification and other stuff, give us the advantages which are there on the liability side also. That's one. The other thing, which I really also feel is that we got an NDS accounting since the last 2.5, 3 years, banks still do not have it, Why is that differentiation? Why are we being so harsh and strict on terms of when the crises have happened, And it's a very open thought for me, basically. And I always voice it around to people. I say, why did you give us this kind of provisioning measures when the going was tough because of COVID pandemic and everything, Auditors don't listen to you. They still go by whatever it is across out there. And we don't, as a forum, technically are able to influence or convince maybe our regulators, why is that difference made across over there? The pandemic is the same for everybody. So if NDS or ECL accounting has to be brought in for NBFCs, please do it for the other people also. So I think, somewhere that level playing field has to be looked on. When you ensure that this is to be done, it has to be done in a fair manner to the NBFCs also.
Yeah. No, I too agree. I think in some of the areas, the broader NBFC sector, including NBFC MFIs, on some issues, we have not been able to really convince the regulator on these aspects. And of course, the previous aspects which you mentioned about an NBFC MFI made to follow everything which a bank does, but still it doesn't have recourse to low-cost funding in terms of deposits.
Yeah,
I think that's something which personally I also feel that at every point of time, our MFI sector easily gets satisfied with small mercies.
I know.
We don't argue for the
Exactly.
bigger picture.
And Satishji, just to mention that, and that's what the case is. Right now the NPA classification rule, which is already set in and setting in basically. Why are you making it for NBFC MFI? Technically over here, you've seen how NBFC MFI performed during a crisis or anything. Why is that once an NPA becomes an NPA basically? Because let the borrower, because that borrower is so small, his cash flows are so tiny and minute that even if he's not able to repay the whole amount to get out of this thing, why are we penalizing him also? So when this whole FIDC thing, which was sent to the RBI, that okay, fine, anything which is below 2 lakh, for a borrower, please consider it in a positive frame of mind. Never paint everybody in the same brush. And that is where my viewpoint is very different for the regulator. For us, anything which is to this section of the society, let's give him some kind of an advantage as compared to a borrower who sits in the urban city. Now, a commercial vehicle borrower and a borrower who's taken a large loan, as compared to somebody who's taken a 30,000 rupees loan and whose installment is 800 rupees, he's not able to pay 800 rupees. That is the reason why he has reached out to us. Otherwise, for him, he could have gone to a bank and the bank could have given him a higher amount. So why that NPA classification should be there for this small borrower as compared to what will happen to the other large borrowers? So it's not levelized. It's not. And I'm very sorry to state that. I think that vision of really looking at microfinance, that emanates from the fact again is that we've never placed MFI as microfinance as something which is different, something which really helps the social cause. We talk about it, but when it comes down to even things like these, this is a cause which has to be taken up very seriously. Please understand, it's a 30,000 borrower. Why do you compare it with a borrower which is at 5 lakh rupees, 10 lakh rupees, or 20 lakh rupees? Basically, he's not the same. Why are you treating him in the same fashion? Even though it's my books, but still, this guy will get affected. His credit bureau record will get affected. He doesn't come out of the NPA if he pays 2 installments and come back to par 60. Why is that?
No, I too agree, because most of our borrowers are in the informal sector, and their income flows are uneven and they are not bound. And even if there is a minor disturbance like a heavy rain in certain district or a cyclone and all, but again, what of course you have also seen and I have also seen is that even if a person misses a couple of installments, he will again come back with in the 3rd month and 4th month to
start paying. Yeah, and start paying. But he will still remain in 90 DPD, even if he starts paying. But why are we, trying to, bring him down to his knees? That your credit bureau record is affected and everything. It's fine. Governance is fine, but governance with a heart is fine. Don't have a governance with a mind. Basically have somewhere where an NBFC MFI is there. And I always say, over here, please treat our borrowers with a heart. It is not the borrowers which you treat in the urban space. This borrower is different.
That's true. That's true. I think from our sector also started arguing with the RBI. Let us see. Some thinking is there. Let's hope that at least for the smaller borrowers, some relaxation. Because when you are mentioning this, I recall when after the financial sector reforms, RBI came out with this income recognition and asset classification norms. At the time, even agriculture credit, they put under the same this thing. Then I had to, though I was in NABARD, I wrote a very strong article in Business Line that with this attitude, the agriculture credit scenario will be ruined, because there the farmer pays only when the harvest comes, and you can't link a harvest to 90 days and 180 days.
Right.
Fortunately, at that time, RBI saw reason and linked the repayment to the harvest season and all. So let us hope that even this time Reserve Bank sees some reason and
absolutely. We'll all keep on hoping,
Yeah. So that's why I said, even in case of when I first went from NABARD, when I came to the microfinance sector, I said some of the things which we have not argued very strongly with the government and RBI in terms of, when I always say that when there are microfinance banks which are allowed to collect deposits in Bangladesh and Pakistan, and to some extent in Sri Lanka, why not in India?
Right.
Our regulatory frameworks and systems are more robust and more stronger. We should be able to do that. but somehow the sector has not strongly argued for that. Another thing which again coming back to Satin family itself, as we've seen that you branched into one area for enterprise type of financing, then also housing. Then at the same time, you have put in place a BC arm, Tarashna. So, do you feel that graduating microfinance clients necessarily have to look at other set of financial institutions to take care of their further financial needs, or the existing MFI itself will be able to do that?
See, that's again a thought which I think, all institutions have to really look inwards for themselves, that what do they really want to become maybe after a few years of continuing forward, We were somewhat clear after the Demon crisis that for us, venturing out into secured lending to a certain extent would also mitigate the risk which probably we've encountered because of demonetization and the AP crisis and the various other crises which have really come in, And the other fact which was also there is that technically for my microfinance borrower who graduates, where does he go? Now, for him to actually transform his rapport with the microfinance institution down to, let's say, a State Bank of India after passing on from microfinance to that, or maybe go to any housing finance company which has probably lesser roots in the rural space and then more in the urban space, where do they go from there, basically? And that's a logical framework which comes in that, if somebody's take a loan of about 50,000 rupees, how does he graduate to about 1 lakh of rupees or 1.5 lakhs, for his business needs, he won't have much avenues rather than to just go to the normal big universal banks and really look at them to do that, So that was also a pressing need which we felt is able to take care of our MSME subsidiary as well as our housing finance subsidiary. And the BC arm was also probably a fallout of the crisis when the AP crisis hit in 2010. So our BC arm was formed in 2011 only, right at the start of this crisis in AP. Because there we felt that, once you are able to actually leverage our distribution franchisee for the partner banks with a lesser amount of capital in terms of FLDG to probably go. And I think that was the advantage which the BC model had. And that is how we came into being and did that. So I think, my own sense again is that, every crisis, whenever it comes, it throws up opportunities for you to really think ahead that how do you really want to go forward. For us now, the way forward also is that, we keep on doing microfinance the way we want to do, plus also build up our non-microfinance book also for our microfinance graduated borrowers so that they're able to reap the benefits of staying in touch with one organization and getting in maybe a higher ticket size loan, a longer tenure loan, a housing finance loan, and also try and see if we are able to help our partner banks achieve the distribution franchises which we think we can actually deliver.
Singh Saab, connected with this is the issue where the graduating borrowers, now we are seeing going to maybe in your framework, you have a different NBFC which looks after the micro enterprise financing, or sometimes they have to go to another bank. But at the same time, do you feel that even within the microfinance space, has the time come that we have to look beyond the JLG model to individual lending model? Because whenever I interact with microfinance institutions in other countries, especially in Latin America and Africa, what I find is that even those institutions 15-20 years back, which were in the group model, many of them have graduated to individual lending model. So there also, of course, there are different issues. But of course, for an institution like yours, which I would say moved from individual lending model into JLG. So now, do you think that some tweaking of this group model is it necessary at this time?
Um, I think, again, Satishji, it's a fact that, once the COVID pandemic hit, and all these things hit, I think, the JLG model probably has run its due course to a large extent. I think, there is a fatigue factors setting in now for the JLG model. There is probably, I don't think so that there is any kind of a creativity happening around the JLG model as such. It's the same uniform model. You can either tweak it away from, the weekly, fortnightly down to monthly. That's what is coming. But I think, you need to have a fresh look at the JLG model. And I don't have an answer to it, to be very honestly, that, should we shift from a JLG model to a individual lending model? What's the answer, but definitely, yes, the JLG model probably seeing what its advantages were. I think it probably we don't see it, on the ground very much more here, because the social collateral which it used to boast about, I think, that is probably, fading away to a large extent, Will an individual lending model be as successful, be a replacement for JLG model? I still have probably my doubts on that 100%. What has to be done? Probably we'll have to again rethink our strategy. We'll all have to go back to our own thoughts of finance professionals as such, who have run these businesses for now several decades as such, to rethink, how do we really want to see this graduating into, or maybe finding the best possible form, the way it used to be in the JLG model earlier. I think, we need to be more creative. We need to be more, see around, how the crisis has hit. What are the takeaways from that? What advantages can we take away from these crises? Could it be cashless collection? Could it be, just a center meeting being held without transacting business, or just being there to have a one-touch, center meeting to happen? Should monthly be the answer? Should weekly be the answer? I think, we'll all have to rethink the strategy. But yes, definitely, yes, the JLG method needs a change now. Will it be a complete change, or will it be a tweaking change? It's for all of us to really find the best way to move forward.
Mr. Singh, what we have seen is that at least for the last 1 decade or more than 1 decade, financial services and technology have become very intertwined. There is no separation of the two. And more so, at least I think in the last 5 years. And same is with the microfinance sector within the institutions and the way we deal with our clients and all. But with all this, what I can say is the poor women, the underprivileged women at the grassroots level, how comfortable have they become with using technology in the various forms, and whether at a point of time in future we can completely work without pen and paper and without cash, both within the institution as well as when you are dealing with your clients.
Sorry, I just got distracted. Satiji, can you just repeat the question? Sorry.
What I say is that at the borrower level, can we completely transform into a paperless and a cashless scenario?
Again, I really don't think so, whether that can really happen, basically for all the borrowers to transform into paying through the digital mode. See, disbursements have happened because that was the most easiest thing to do, moving their money to their bank account straight away was fine because the help you got in terms of opening up of bank accounts probably was the answer to it, But having a borrower in the rural space actually transform into making a digital payment in terms of collection is something which is going to maybe take a large number of years, for us to transform. Now, having said that, I think you can have paperless, loan agreements which have digital signatures, KYC, which is e-KYCs and all that stuff. That will happen. So things which are easily manageable to do, which does not transform the behavioral change in the borrower, I think that'll be easier to do. But where it actually impacts the way the customer behaves in the rural fashion and the women behaves in the rural fashion, I think that will take some amount of time to really, settle through and do that, Again, one of the thoughts which I, really have, we're all talking about technology and everything across over there. But we're not looking at what exactly does my borrower want, We are talking about technology from our standpoint. We're not talking about technology from her standpoint. We do not want to transform technology to give her a benefit. We are trying to talk about technology to give us a benefit, For us, it's all about, how can I bring my operating costs down? How can I look at technology that I can get data instantly? I can, work on it, But if we start thinking about how do we really transform the way we actually deliver to the borrower and we are able to bring in that kind of a change, believe me, it'll be far more successful than we just talking about technology from our standpoint, If we're able to say that, okay, fine, I can in this way give you maybe a loan in 1 minute. I can actually do the GRT and maybe the stuff which we do actually on the ground. If you are able to transform that based on an algorithm, which actually helps you get a loan faster, then probably looking at it from the viewpoint that, does it make my commercial sense to probably bring the operating cost down? That will come, definitely, as I'm saying, don't leave that away, but also think about how we are able to really transform the lives of our borrowers in a fashion where it actually helps them also gain much more. Can it be where somebody, they can increase their revenue from which they can pay their installment? Believe me, if that comes in, they're able to increase their revenue in which possible ways, your portfolio quality will never suffer. So I think we'll have to think from those angles, that how do we really empower our borrowers in terms of technology and other things, so that it really helps them also. Plus, it helps us commercially also.
Since one of the reasons why I pose this question to you is that over the last 2-3 years, I have been seeing that, of course, at least in urban centers and all, like people who never accepted anything other than cash, saying that मेरे पास चेंज नहीं है, मुझे पेटीएम करो, गूगल पे करो. So that initially I was also surprised that I didn't expect such a transformation. People seem to be a little more comfortable with this.
So urban centers, yes, you're right.
Wallets and all.
Urban centers, it will happen faster than what the rural happens. But we have all the toolkits. We have a customer service app today where you can actually make a payment. You can make a payment through our website. You can do anything. We have all the toolkits which are there. For a borrower to do it. But it is still about a certain percentage which is still very low, and that entire transformation will take some time before it happens. But it will happen for sure.
Since one thing, because now we have. Of course, partly you had answered this question. Now, the sector is progressing. We are also getting new clients and customers, and institutions are also expanding. So, in such a scenario, is there a space for new entrants to enter the space of microfinance sector, and also space for the smaller institutions to grow and prosper? If that is so, then as a person who has seen the sector over the last 3 decades, what is your advice to the new entrants and the small ones for them to really grow and expand their services?
Satish, I think, there is always room for somebody to come in. I never feel that, it's too late for anyone to probably come into any sector, which is there. Even if you have, probably a saturation space which is going on, you can still come out with something which is entirely different in terms of your offerings and the way you actually handle the business. So my sense for and my thought process is always that there's space for everyone, even new entrants to what they call it. The only thing which they have to really look at and do is that how do you actually bring across on the table and deliver to the actual customers? Is it the way that we all have been traditionally following, or you have to really think about it, how technology, how other things would probably work in, and you're able to deliver in a much faster and a much better fashion. I think, there is room for everyone. The other, I think, factor which I missed probably saying is that I think, the blockages which we have in terms of, just for an instance, if you really look at the qualifying and non-qualifying asset criteria, now that's a big block, which probably is there for us to really look at in a far more bigger fashion of looking at microfinance plus, which I always keep on saying is there to look at, So if these things are also taken away from, the way we actually want to work, I think, then the sector is also going to look up far more robust and far more better. And it is going to be for the benefit of the whole economy as such. It has to be looked and viewed from that. And more players coming in definitely is going to augur very well for the sector. The sector keeps on expanding, more people coming in, more voices are there in the market, more we are able to influence the regulators to think about the way we think about it, not just from purely, I always say that there is a difference between the mind and the heart, not only from the mind space, but also have a heart also to really look forward towards it. So I think, there is room for everyone, and even for smaller institutions, just do it right. I think, whatever we face through, a couple of defaults, very unfortunate, which have happened is, my sense is just do it right. I think, you'll be able to do it, the way you have to do it.
Singh Saab, as you over the last so many years, you must have been interacting with impact investors, especially social impact investors. Even in my interactions with them, at a certain point of time, let us say 2 decades back, a huge focus of such class of investors was there on microfinance. But later, lesser focus is there, and the concentration is on other sectors also for impact investors. So do you feel that the sector can really do something to bring back more of impact investor class to the microfinance sector in India?
See, again, it's how we portray ourselves. I think, for us, and that is where my constant, this thing to everybody whom I meet is always there. We've never been projected the way we really wanted to project ourselves. And I think, that is something which is hugely lacking, in spite of the, and nothing against, Satiji, against Sadhan, MFIN, or anybody, or maybe or the regulars, anything, I think, we as a community, of people delivering microfinance, I think, for us, this is to really to rethink, how do we place ourselves? We've never been placed right. It's always been that we are, we've charged less, but we still be compared to the money lender. Whenever there is talk about anything, people will talk about, the politician will talk about loan waivers. Why is all this? Why is never we be seen as something which adds up to the economy rather than we are the ones who disrupt the economy? Because by doing all this, I think, what they are doing is they're killing somebody, something which really works very well for the economy, the rural economy especially, and for the down and the marginalized class. Why have we really not been able to keep up that pace that we are able to see it in that light? And I always compare, though it's not an apple to apple comparison, but I always say, look at the way IT is now figured out to be basically. Today, if you really look at the attrition is the highest in that industry. The salary packages is like gone through the roof. You are not able to get even a decent guy across over there. But why is it also, and nobody talks ill about it. We've done everything. The highest employment generated by feet on street in the rural space is done by MFIs. The highest, rural economy which works is done by MFIs. We've done human service as compared to anybody else, but we've never been portrayed somewhere where we should have been portrayed, and that is where my disconnect always remains. And one of the reasons why I always shy away from all these, to be very honest, and I'm sharing this first time publicly across this, that I shy away from all this is basically because I do not see a reason that the way we are able to project ourselves, why are we taking that beating always? And that's what my, disconnect factor is with everybody, is there, that we've not really been able to bring it to its glory the way it should have been. And it's a glorious feeling, not because I've done it for 30 years, but I see the impact which it has created in my life, in the lives of the people which we serve, as well as our employees, Today, we have 12,000 employees all across in our system. For me, that's the biggest family I've got. Whoever is able to do it day in and day out, and look at their daily this thing, starting at 7-8 o'clock in the morning, working till evening, what passion is driving them, basically is because they are doing microfinance. That's what is driving them.
Well put it, Mr. Singh. I think I too feel that probably somewhere we have also not only as a association but in a broader sector, we are only doing firefighting when events occur, rather than portraying and putting the sector in a broader framework and telling what exactly we are doing for the people.
Yeah, and so Satish, my advice, very simple advice on this is, we as organization, whatever we're doing, we should do it. But my sense is, have two boxes in whatever organization has SROs as well as this thing across. And I'm probably not coming in from somewhere whom I can probably say it, so I'm not using my co-chair hat of Sadhan to probably do it. But my sense is that, I think, we should have two compartments very firmly in every, be it MFIN, be it Sadhan, be it our own organization. One should be like a firefighting machine, which should be there. And one compartment which just keeps on carrying on the job of advocacy of bringing this sector into the glory which it earlier used to have, If we are able to do that, so we should have both the compartments working together, because what happens when a firefighting has to happen, everybody just gets into that, and you forget to, look at the other side of the advocacy, which we really have to keep on constantly doing. Because if we keep on doing that, I think, we'll probably have a far more better answer than what we have today. Basically, I think, that we should probably, start looking at it and start working on it.
No, I think it's a good advice for an sector association like Sadhan also. Certainly, we should do that. Of course, to some extent we are doing, but that I would say it is like scratching on the surface, not really doing in a very comprehensive way. And to a nice conversation, Singh Saab, with you, and a lot of insights. Lastly, of course, you have mentioned about your staff and your workforce, and I've also seen that Satin is also ranked as one of the great places to work. Day before yesterday, we had a webinar on the best HR practices, and your HR head also was there. So there itself, I was mentioning that in financial sector, our greatest resource is not finance, but human resources, people.
Right.
So taking off from that, what would be your advice to youngsters who want to enter the development finance field, especially microfinance?
So, I think, it starts from, if you have the passion and you have the ability and be honest about it, I think this is probably the best financial services field which you can enter into. Passion and the ability and to stay honest and true to this thing. This is all about that for microfinance. And youngsters who have this ability, I think this is the best place to work in the financial services field.
I think, Mr. Singh, it's a very, what we can say, very nice and positive message to the youngsters who want to enter the finance field. With this, let us wrap up this discussion, and it was a nice, we nearly had a exchange of views on so many issues for about 1 hour. And thank you for taking your time off and sparing your time and having this interaction with you.
Pleasure's mine. Pleasure's mine. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.